introduce Rhys from Green Ideas, and he's going to talk to us about mental health in paddle sport, and in particular how it affects us on expeditions. So thanks very much, Rhys.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm going to share my screen for a little bit. It's mainly so you don't have to look at my face or anything like that the whole time through. And as things are being recorded and stuff, there'll be some nice pictures in the background, which will be a little bit nicer for the recording and being able to share stuff thereafter. So I'll share my screen. It's mainly for some pictures being on, so you have to look at me instead. So bear with me for a second whilst that's just up and sharing. There you go. So hopefully that's all visible nice and easy. And it'll be similar to this as we're going along. A picture, a word, maybe a couple of words, just to keep me on track slightly, because I do, people who've listened to me in the past or done bits and pieces with me in the past know I do go off on tangents a little bit. So this helps just to keep me on track slightly and to make sure that what's going on is supposed to be going on. So just very briefly, a little bit about myself and kind of where we're moving and what this chat's going to be about a little bit. So for myself, I'm a paddler first and foremost. That's the main thing I like doing, or when I can do it anyway, that's what I enjoy doing. I've been fortunate enough to travel quite a bit with my paddling. So various places in the UK, places, or places in Africa, New Zealand, America, through Europe, and then some bits and pieces as well around Malaysia. So lots of different expedition type things, few different things going on, which is really enjoyable. I deliver different courses, lots of different paddling bits and pieces, but within mental health, things started for me quite a few years ago, looking at my coaching itself. So changing my coaching practice, my coaching styles to focus very much on that psychology side of things and assisting people to enjoy where they are, enjoy their environment where they're paddling, opposed to just trying to learn the skills and coaching skills. So very much changing to focus on coaching people, with the skills being a byproduct. So when people get more comfortable, they're able to take in that learning a little bit more, and things kind of developed from there. And it went into a state when I went back to university, backwards and forwards with different things. And I eventually did my master's, and my thesis focused on paddle sport motivation. So why do different people want to paddle different disciplines in Wales? So I spent a bit of time learning about that side of it and then developing things from there thereafter. So that's a little bit about me, why I'm interested in mental healthy type things and paddling and all that kind of stuff tying together. But tonight as well, we're going to be looking at expeditions. So I thought I'd just touch on what I perceive an expedition to be, and then a little bit on what mental health is, and we can kind of see where everything matches up slightly. So for me, an expedition is some kind of journey with some kind of unknowns that are going on. So it could be a new area, a new group. It could be over a single day. It could be multi-days. But mainly it's all about that journey. So there's a change of scenery. I'm changing things as I'm going along. That's what I feel an expedition has at its heart, really. And then some mental healthy type stuff. So all the pictures may not be relevant to what I'm really speaking about. They're just some pictures going on. So mental health. So mental health is our emotional, social, and psychological well-being. Emotions are kind of connected to thoughts and feelings. And our thoughts and feelings can assist us with creating emotions. And all of this can change our overall mental well-being. So tonight's chat is going to be about our emotions and looking at that journey and expedition side of things. So that's where we're going with stuff. So hopefully everyone's got a bit of an idea where we're starting off with. Looks a bit disorganized, but that's kind of my organization side of things. But as I mentioned, for me, I've been fortunate to be able to take part in quite a few different expeditions all over the place. I've been participants, I've guided things, I've led expeditions. Within most situations, just within every situation, I like to be informed by what's actually going on, being involved with that process. when I was growing up, I was very forgetful with everything. Like a lot of children, they generally forget a school book going into school. I'd forget my bag. So I was very disorganized. Things didn't really ever work out that well. So I started to create systems to make myself more organized. And it kind of got to this kind of stage where it's going through, I've got a wall planner and I've got different color post-it notes which correlate to different things to help to keep me organized, to keep me on track with where I'm going, what's going on. And that stems to all different areas when I'm looking at trips and expeditions. I like to have an idea of what's going on, how things are going to line up, being involved through that process, being able to contribute with different things as I'm going along, having some kind of control of what's able to happen, control of my own destiny. Without that, I don't feel 100% comfortable. I mean, other people can come up with a majority of information, but if I can contribute things, then I start to have autonomy over where I'm going and how things are kind of lining up. And that's a really important thing when we're looking at expeditions, when we're looking at trips. That ability to give people autonomy, a chance to be able to make their own mind up, how things are going to line up, what they're able to do, and how things can pan out for them, giving people options. So autonomy, definitely a key part within this. Along with that thought of autonomy or control comes a kind of thought regarding the level of the expedition or the aims of an expedition. So I've been, again, fortunate enough to be able to go on multi-day kind of expeditions where the aim has been to get from point A to point B. One of my prime examples of this is within the picture here. It's when I was in New Zealand, and it's the river Anatoki, and it's the hardest river I've really ever done. It was helicopter drop off, 12 kilometers of continuous grade 5, where the biggest let off was around 50-meter kind of pools. It was pretty much like this picture for a day and a half of paddling. I had to be fully switched on the whole time. I'm the person here with a red helmet, blue buoyancy aid, with a different paddle to the one I should have because my one broke before that. But that's a whole nother story. But that was my kind of aim. So my aim of that trip, that expedition, was to go from point A to point B. That's what I wanted to be doing. And my kind of competence level allowed me to do that. On the flip side of that, I've gone on trips in the past where it's been a complete mill pond, where I've been aiming to go out to go on a bit of a sea trip, look at some wildlife, look at different cliff structures, and have a good chat with people. So when we think about the different aims of our expeditions, how things can kind of go on, things can kind of match up differently. But the aims of the expedition are very much dependent on the environment, and everything's matched up with my ability. So all comes down to my competence levels. So that fairly relaxed, mundane kind of mill pond paddle was still around 30 kilometers or so each way. So it's still a fairly long day. I was going for a longer journey doing things, but it was all attainable and achievable due to my competence levels. So I had the autonomy to make up my own mind where I wanted to go. And I was able to do so because of my competence levels within that as well. So when we're looking at expeditions with other people, trying to think about where they're starting from. What are their starting points? What's their competence level? What are the aims that they have for their expedition? And giving them those decision-making processes or the ability to make appropriate decisions along the way so they can best meet their expedition aims. So all of this filters down to our competence levels as a second little part. Tying together competence and our aims, or the autonomy side of things, is our knowledge base. So that kind of starting point. How we can kind of piece together these bits of information. So the more knowledge we have, the more informed we'll be. The more informed we are, the better judgments we can make. And the better judgment I can make is basically dependent on my competence levels in relation to the demands or the different control I can have around that decision-making process. So the more I understand about what the activities I'm doing, where I am, the location, just enables me to make different decisions along the way. So again, thinking about the groups we're taking out or who we might be leading on our expedition, trying to give them a sufficient amount of information for them to make more informed decisions thereafter. I will tie things together a bit more as we go along. At the moment, I'm just going through a few bits and pieces, laying some foundations down. And this filtered into relatedness. So relatedness isn't just about the activity, but it's about the area. So if I didn't know too much about an activity, but I was in an area that I visited several times, it can make a bit more sense to me. Likewise, if I'm doing an activity that I know very well, I can go to a different country and perform fairly well within that activity because I know the activity. Equally, I can be with a new group of people or a group of people that I know very well. If I've got different things which connect me with what's going on, I'm more likely to be able to succeed within that environment, or I'm more motivated to do so. So these three areas that I've touched on very briefly are looking at autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And these are three foundations within some motivational kind of theory, which comes to, I'll chuck out some names at everyone, but this looks at self-determination theory and basic psychological needs theory. And if we miss one of these areas, people are going to be less motivated to be able to continue with things. But equally, if we bypass one of these areas or completely miss one of these things, chances are people aren't going to be engaging as appropriately. And subsequently, they may start to switch off slightly or not be as happy within that process. So I've mentioned a few things about myself and what I enjoy within different expeditions and how things kind of get me going slightly regarding some examples around that autonomy, competence, and relatedness. But it's also thinking about our groups. The groups we're with could be different client bases, lots of different things going on, but it's all about the aims of the group. So when we are meeting people, typically we know what they're signed up to, what they want to be doing, why they're there in the first place. A lot of the time they're paid to go on something. So that's a good indication that you kind of know what they're aiming to do. Because if they've signed up to do a day's kayaking, we kind of know they want to go kayaking. And if they've signed up to go kayaking in a certain area with you, then we've got a good idea that's what they're after doing. So that autonomy has already been started off. They've initiated what they want to be doing, which is a winner. It's always great. But when we're meeting and greeting people, trying to lay some basic foundations. So basic bits of information. What can we find out beforehand? Can we find out what experiences they've got beforehand? Where we can kind of build up to make sure that the information we're giving them is aligning with their expectations. So those introduction kind of chats, finding out different people's skill level, gives us a good grounding, a good start point for the expedition. Gaining information is massively key for making sure that we can enable them to get what they want out of their expedition. because otherwise we can go off on a completely different tangent to where they're after, and it may not line up to what they actually want to be doing, which will make them uncomfortable with where perhaps they want to move forwards to. So all of this can kind of tie into giving people an idea of how long the expedition is going to be, how long the day trip's going to be, SE6 stop points they want to be, or trying to let people know when we have to regroup. Just a few ideas, a few foundations early on can start to get people a bit of an idea of where we might be moving to. And this will assist people with having a better understanding of where we are, what we're doing, so they can become more related to the activity, to the area, and have a better understanding of the expectations. So the greater understanding that we have around expectations can start to alleviate certain anxieties that people may have. So if we can keep people fully informed or give them the information that they may desire, we should start to reduce anxiety levels. So for instance, if I was speaking to a group of people and mention about a rapid that's coming up, and then I start to get more questions about the rapid, or I see a couple of people kind of climbing up slightly, not wanting to start to speak because I've mentioned the word rapid, that for me is a bit of an indication that perhaps the rapid is causing some thoughts of anxiety, or it could be causing some levels of excitement for people. So I can start to tackle that information, give them some reassurances regarding different options for when we get down there. Again, giving them some more autonomy regarding their aims of their expedition or of their day, whatever we fancy doing. So when we get down to the rapid, it could be a case of I could sit there and I can go through, okay, we can actually walk around this rapid, nice and easy. Or if you do want to go down it, here's a nice easy line for going down it. So again, I can give them options and try and assist them with that understanding regarding what those aims are or what their aims are, just to make sure that I can assist them in reaching those aims for that expedition in particular. So yeah, all coming down to those different options, thinking about where we're paddling, how fast we might be paddling, and just thinking about laying out some easy groundworks so that people know when we may want to be speaking to them. So they've got the comfort level, they can go off, they can explore. And when there may be a crux, that I can actually bring them back in towards me. So making sure we've got appropriate safety measures in place, so that when we reach a certain crux, that we can actually go through things nice and easily with that group. All of this will assist people with having more choice of where they want to be. And it means that if some people do want to hang back and have more of a conversation, I can speak to those individuals a little bit more. I can alleviate their concerns a little bit. Whereas if others are getting a little bit bored by what's going on, they know they've got the freedom to explore slightly without necessarily getting into trouble by doing so. So I'm giving lots of people options as to what they may want to do, which will start to engage them at appropriate levels. And it'll make them more at ease with what they want to be doing. So that communication level, giving people the information of what they need, when they may need it, to ensure that they're going to be happy throughout that starting point of that expedition. It allows us to make sure that individual aims are being catered for within that whole group structure. So if I was to take everyone down and lead everyone and be at the front the whole time, for some people, that might be really appropriate. But for others, I might be actually taking away that expedition experience of what they want. They may want to have the opportunity to be able to explore and to take things in for themselves because they've been on lots of expeditions before and their knowledge base is greater than other people's. So for them, what they may need is the ability to explore, to lead, to be at the front, and to take more control over things, to engage them appropriately so that they are getting what they want from that situation. So as mentioned earlier, I was speaking about arriving at a crux, a bit of a rapid, something that's going on. So when we get to these kind of areas, I've got different options. I've got different things that I can kind of tell people. I've got different positions that I can place my in. I can give people different pros and cons. So let's speak about a rapid for a second. So if I was to arrive at a rapid, I could sit at the top of the rapid and I could go through different information with the group regarding how they could perhaps get all their equipment out of the canoes, and they could line the canoes down nice and easily, get everything back in below it. Or they could paddle down it if they wish to, but I can kind of give them a bit of an idea of what may be the easiest way of doing things. Thinking about that desired outcome. If the desired outcome is to get from point A to point B, then I've given them an option that will keep them nice and dry. I can alleviate the concerns perhaps of getting wet, of getting their equipment wet as they're going along. If this rapid, for instance, was on day 1 of a 4-day expedition, it was a bit overcast, it was a bit rainy, things weren't looking overly nice, then I've given them a nice option regarding a way of still tackling the distance of where they want to go, but they're actually able to walk around so they can keep everything nice and dry. So I'm able to alleviate a lot of their concerns, a lot of their anxieties by where I'm setting myself up. So by sitting at the top of a rapid and waiting for my group to turn up all nicely, just sitting there and saying, cool, so here are your options for this rapid. You can have a little bit of get out, you can have a little wander around it, we can kind of sort things out nice and easy. Or if you wish to paddle down it, you can do that as well. Just make sure that maybe you're getting some equipment out. If you do have any concerns about getting wet, you can get your kit out earlier, nice and easy, and that stuff won't get wet then. So I can either give nice options regarding how to avoid a situation altogether, or I can alleviate concerns around a certain environment by giving them nice options and different coping strategies. So we can get everything out and we can keep you nice and dry. Another option I have is I could sit at the bottom of the rapid. I can go through it first and I can sit at the bottom and see what decisions they come up with. And occasionally that could end up with lots of people swimming all over the place, a bit of disaster stuff going on. But how I set things up can definitely impact the way that a situation unfolds. Through method 1, sitting above the rapid, sitting upstream of things, I can alleviate concerns regarding expectations, regarding social pressure, regarding anxieties about a situation. If they decide to paddle down it, they can get all their kit out. So the worst case scenario is they get a bit wet, their boat gets a bit wet. No big dramas. Whereas if I sit below and just wait for things to unfold, I could be adding pressure to them because they perceive, well, he's at the bottom, I have to paddle down it to get to the same place. Whereas if I'm just sitting at the top, having a nice little chat with them, asking them, what are the options? What do you fancy doing? I'm giving them the autonomy, and I can start to kind of guide them to a point where actually there's lots of different options. There's lots of different ways we can go about this. If the aim is to get from point A to point B, who says it all has to be in a canoe paddling to get down there? Why can't you get out and walk down some things? It's all part of the journey. So alleviating concerns, removing some anxieties, so we necessarily don't end up with that kind of scared, terrified look on our face, floating off that down a river a little bit. How we start off our expeditions, how we start off our journeys can drastically change how things are perceived later on. I know a lot of the time we're told to not judge a book by its cover, but a lot of us do in reality. At that initial kind of thought process, that initial meet and greet sets up how a day may unfold. So if we're able to meet people nice and easily, to give them options regarding when to speak to us, when to ask for different bits of information, being open and being receptive to different questions. If people are asking a question and we're dismissing it like it's a stupid question, when it comes to a crux point later on, when they're becoming anxious about something, are they necessarily going to tell us they're anxious about it? Or are they going to think that we'll just dismiss them like we did with the silly question earlier on? So if we start off our days by greeting people appropriately, by treating just about every question like it's an actually important question, because it will be important for that individual regarding where they're able to put their coat, where they're able to put their phone, or whatever kind of things they could be wanting to be sorting out. Assisting them and giving them good time of day at the beginning means that if there is a slight issue later on, they're more likely to tell us about it so that we can assist them with a slight issue before it becomes something a little bit too much for them to want to be able to cope with. So it's, for me, a lot of things are about setting up that good structure of appropriate communication, giving people good space for being able to voice any concerns, because my aim with the majority of paddling I end up doing is, or any expedition, not just paddling, any outdoor thing, is getting people to want to come back. They don't have to come back and do stuff with me, but to go back into that environment, to enjoy where they were so that they want to do a similar activity again in the future. So if I can set things up appropriately so that there's a few smiling faces as we're going along, it ties things in to allow people to alleviate some anxieties, to be able to ask any questions should there be any minor concerns, because minor concerns can build as people go along, and it can start to create a negative thought process. But if we can get people to ask questions, we can then start to find out what is the actual concern. What is the thing that's perhaps preventing them wanting to do something? And then we can look at what are the solutions. What I've spoken about so far is just looking at those communication structures, looking at setting things up appropriately so that people want to speak about things, that they want to be able to open up, or they know that they can ask questions as we're going along. So that's one small area within the expedition kind of structure. It's an important area, definitely. Getting people to be able to speak about things, to ask things, and to set things up, getting that appropriate information to start off with, and it's tying in that autonomy, competence, and relatedness. But other things which can kind of tie in with our mental health and that expedition process is thinking about what we're eating. So appropriate food whilst we're out on expedition. If we have lots of caffeine-based things or lots of alcohol, lots of sugar-based bits and pieces, chances are we're going to go through peaks and troughs throughout our day. We're going to have highs, we're going to have lows, which could correlate with how we're feeling within certain moments. Different amounts of sleep can impact our decision-making process, as can our hydration levels. All of this can impact how we're going to handle different stressful situations. So pending the length of our expedition, these things start to become more appropriate as we're going along. The time of day, the time of year, as we're doing things as well. So thinking about expedition, different structures and things, I'm sure that everyone here has heard of Maslow and stuff like that. So looking at so hierarchy of needs, basically. So being able to tick off those bottom level side of things. So food, water, warmth, all those bits and pieces, thinking about our different groups, thinking about who we're taking out, what clothing do they have on. If we're able to look after groups and keep them warmer and happier, And we've got appropriate safety measures in place as expedition leaders, they're actually able to start to form those different friendships. They're actually able to start communicating more effectively because they're starting to tick towards that those psychological needs. They can start to move towards there. And once we're able to move towards there, that's when we can start to build esteem, that sense of accomplishment, that desire to want to continue with things. So as we're out with people, just think about how we're looking after people to enable them to achieve success. If we're getting people soaking wet, cold, and they're hungry after doing whatever on their first day, chance of them enjoying the rest of their day is going to diminish quite a bit because we're not looking after those, we can't look after those psychological needs because we've missed that bottom level. We need to be content in our normal surroundings before we can start to take in new bits of information. I'm sure people here have been on different coaching courses and different learning processes in the past where we've talked about how many things can we learn, and it's 3 new bits of information, give or take 2, pending the situation we're within. So if we take people outside of their comfort zone, the likelihood is they're not going to take in as much information. So if we're taking people who are perhaps new to an activity into that activity, so let's use canoeing again as our example, we need to start off at a nice basic level for them to be able to receive the information. If we can set things up so that perhaps they've tried camping at home, they've just stayed out in their garden, then camping isn't a new experience. It's not going to build as much anxiety as other bits and pieces possible because we can start it off at a lower level. Same as with the canoeing side of it itself. If we can start off with a basic day trip, opposed to going straight into a 4-day expedition, people can build on their experience level slowly. And as we can start to layer things bit by bit and gain bits of information, our world around us starts to make more sense. So all about that preparation side of things. If we're looking at our food base for an expedition, if it's the first time that someone's using a transit and everything's boiling in the bag, they've never had anything like it, it's their first time camping, it's their first time paddling, there are so many first time things going on that trying to make sense of that whole world is going to be very difficult for people if we're thinking of that taking in 2 or 3 bits of information. So trying to make things as relatable as it can be for those individuals with normal bits of food, with their friend groups, getting used to different activities as we're going along will alleviate a lot of concerns for people moving forwards. So this is looked at, so this is, who is it? Simon Priest, that's who it is, looking at peak adventure and that sort of things. I've kind of tied this in slightly, not necessarily looking at physical risk, but looking at risk towards mental health. So that peak adventure, that adventure side of it, that misadventure, those 3 areas. If we pitch things appropriately for an individual that is at an appropriate level for their expectations, for their competence, for their decision-making capabilities, they're more likely to reach a level that they're comfortable with. If we push people too far and take people too far outside of their comfort zone, have too many unknown variables for an individual, then we may be taking them towards misadventure. And that's not necessarily a physical injury, but it could be impacting their stress levels and their anxiety levels for a situation. So if we can get people used to base levels of paddling and grade 1, grade 2 rapids and getting used to going down those before taking them to that grade 4 as their first rapid, they are far more likely to have an ability to process the information and to be more relaxed with it because things are slowly building in their knowledge base. they're able to be more related to the situation. We can relieve some of the anxieties by giving people appropriate situations leading up to it, opposed to taking people into a situation which may be too much for them within that time period of when they're able to deal with it. If we do reach that misadventure, if we do go beyond the peak adventure side of things, then it's about how we're dealing with that situation thereafter. Calm and reassure people. We need to go through what the expectations are. What are the options? What can we do? What are we able to do? Obviously, if they're floating off down a rapid at 100 miles an hour, we haven't got much time to really speak to them about these things. But hopefully we've stopped above a rapid and we're actually able to discuss what the options are above the rapid and to give people appropriate choices. We can go through the fact that we can line down the rapid, we can make it down there nice and easily. If your concerns are about swimming, what's the worst case scenario? You're going to get a bit wet. Cool. If you're concerned about injury, then speaking about actually the river's very deep today and there's no rocks that are actually going to be bumping into or anything else. So that has hopefully alleviated some concerns with that. If you're concerned about swimming, why? What is it? What is the concern about swimming? Is it the fact that other people may perceive you as not being as good because you're thinking of swimming? Or is it that you just don't want to get in the water today? And once we understand what's causing an anxiety for someone or why someone may not want to do a situation, then we can start to put appropriate measures in place to assist someone to actually find an appropriate solution. Because every cause and effect with everything. So the end result could be greater stress, it could be greater anxiety around an instance. So if we can identify what the causes are, we can try and find solutions for those causes to alleviate those different things that are going along. So thinking about appropriate communication is a big one for me. How we set things up, how approachable we are throughout the expedition process, using first names with people, building personal relationships with people so they know they can come and speak to you as an individual about any concern they may have. Talking to people about what their expectations are, what they want to get out of the day. What are they there to enjoy? And once we can start to communicate more with people, there's a greater likelihood they will tell us about any concerns they may have. And if they can tell us about things earlier on, we can assist with alleviating those concerns. So we all have emotions, thoughts, and feelings. So we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health. And there's a mnemonic with leadership and things called CLAP. And I think it's massively important when we're not just looking at leading people down a river, leading people in a situation, but when we're considering people's mental well-being as well. So thinking about that communication side of things, that line of sight, so how we're kind of passing things on, how we're able to be approachable. Anticipation. So I change things around a little bit. I don't use the word avoid, it says anticipate. Because if we can anticipate what can go wrong, we can kind of anticipate how we can solve things or what measures we can put in place. To avoid things is very easy, you just don't do it at all. But if you can anticipate what could go wrong, then you can put appropriate measures in place to try and resolve things before they happen. And a position of most usefulness. So thinking about where we are and where we can speak to people, where we're placing ourselves, just to make sure that people know that they can come and speak to us whenever things are going on. And just remembering that most causes have an effect, and the effects are going to be stress and anxieties. So what can we do to help to reduce the causes in any given environment? So that's hopefully a bit of a whistle-stop tour, a few tangents kind of going off on different angles, but hopefully tying things in together slightly as we're going along. The main thing for me with the expedition side of stuff and mental health is creating good communication structures. Without good communication, people aren't going to tell you about small things that are going on. If they don't tell you about small things which are going on, you'll only know about it when it becomes too big and there starts to be a greater reaction to those situations. So if we can start to have clear, easy communication about minor things, then it's not going to build up. It's not going to get to a point where it is going to cause an individual to be overly stressed or anxious about a situation. Because they'll come to you about small things, and we can put appropriate measures in place to alleviate the concerns around the small things. So we'll be happier as we're moving forwards. We'll understand what people want to do throughout their expedition. And it means that we'll be able to make sure the expedition is meeting their desires. So they'll hopefully be getting what they want out of things. So I'm going to stop sharing screen stuff just so we can see each other a little bit more.
Hi, Rhys. At the moment, we haven't got any questions that have come in, but I've got a question for you, and it's something that you touched on a little bit, and that was about peer pressure. And for us as guides, we can use peer pressure to our advantage, or it can be definitely to our disadvantage when somebody is working under peer pressure. How do you feel that we can manage peer pressure, and how do you think we should manage peer pressure?
I think it's an interesting one, because some of the time it depends on the situation and how big the issue is, or what could be perceived as the possible consequence of that peer pressure. So if the peer pressure is to, for instance, to do something which is very safe for an individual, but it's just getting them over that slight hurdle. Let's say it's day one of an expedition and we're looking at a grade 1 rapid, and it's getting people down that grade 1 rapid, and that slight amount of peer pressure to get everyone down it means that actually for day 2, day 3, they're going to be able to do things more independently. Then a little bit of peer pressure to assist everyone to actually realize that they can do this minor tasks that will set them up for greater success in the future. That's going to be massively beneficial for them. So a small amount of peer pressure in that kind of lines can assist people to realize, actually, I can do this, especially if we can use a demonstration of someone within a group to show how easy it is and how comfortable it is. Or if us as a leader can go down something without paddling at all, with our eyes closed, backwards, any of these things to show, actually, it's quite easy, it's quite comfortable, it's very attainable for the individual. It can make it a positive because they know they can start to move forwards with it. Whereas if the situation is perhaps towards the end of the day and it's a grade 3, grade 4 rapid that is definitely going to be pushing their boundaries a little bit more, and you've got one person who's on the edge a little bit, on the fence, you notice they've been getting a little bit tired throughout the day, perhaps the peer pressure in that scenario saying, oh, go on, you'll be fine, you'll be able to get down it. And it didn't work out and it went a little bit wrong. And from there, they're getting straight off the water and that's the end of their day. It may have a big negative impact on that individual because the thing they're remembering is their long swim at the end of the day. They may not remember all the good things that happened before that. They'll just be remembering that negative that happened right at the end. So setting people up for appropriate success, for me, is the important side of things. So when we're dealing with peer pressure, depends on the situation and the likelihood of success within that. So if I'm setting someone up and there's a high chance of failure and the peer pressure is pushing them in that direction, I'll try and sell things the opposite way and say, like, you know, oh, for this, actually, walking around stuff, because we can get on nice and easily below it, come back another day, we can start earlier on in the day so you can reach here a little bit sooner and you'll be able to get down to that much easier. Or if we're doing things overnight, if you want to have a look at this tomorrow morning, we can get back on just above it and go down it from there. So it's allowing people to leave with enough positive notes without the last thing they're doing being a negative kind of impact, if that makes sense to people a bit.
Yes, something that we talk about a lot on the guide modules is the TripAdvisor review at the end, because as we all know, that's what sort of the business is all about, really, isn't it? So you leave somebody with a positive experience, they're going to give you a good TripAdvisor review, which
It's
is
always
good.
a winner.
So identifying the peer pressure when it's happening, and maybe stepping in and giving that person some other options, applying almost your own peer pressure, but giving them alternatives so that they don't feel pressured into it.
Yeah, definitely. And I generally look at, or try and get them to look at the different options. And I am definitely guilty of selling what I perceive to be the best option for them to want to come back and to do different things, or to the thing that's most enjoyable for them on a given day. So gone out paddling with people before, and the river levels have been up quite a bit, and looking at different things, and someone wasn't overly comfortable and like, I'm not quite sure if I should be paddling today or not because the river levels. Yeah, actually, I think, like, what you've done so far today, you've had a great day. We've done this, we've done that. You've attained these bits and pieces. Everything's been really good for you. What I think would be great is if you come back when the river levels a little bit lower, and you'll enjoy it a bit more. So I can sell things in that direction, because I think for them, it's going to be best for them if actually they do step out for that day, because they'll have a better time in the future with us, opposed to being put off for things for life because things are far too much outside of their comfort zone.
Yeah, the skill of the guide and the leader, helping the person make the right decision for them, even if they don't know it. I think Steve's got a question. Steve, unmutes himself, please.
Yeah, hi Rhys and Dave. Yeah, I listened carefully there to what you were saying about peer pressure. I tend to use a lot of peer support, and that peer support starts very early on, and it can be, it can be just even in the campsite as we set up, as we meet and greet, and it's people getting used to how other people operate. And people like to be like others. And what I find is that as we get that peer support and people see, well, this is how this person does it, and this is how this person, we tend to build confidence with each other. And I think that translates well to when we get to the water. So that, when we're sat, either on a bit of coastline or in an eddy, and we're talking to people that, quite often we're just getting to know, and we're sharing, beginning to start sharing those experiences. It's using those things that we pull together from individuals that, can take us down the body of water or wherever it is. So not so much peer pressure, it's peer support, peer guidance, because we want that support to come from those people in the group, and not particularly from the leader, because when we walk away, well, the leader got me to do this, the leader made me do it. They advise that, well, actually, when we go on a journey, we want everybody, as you quite rightly said, we want people to buy in, and we want them to buy in at their level. So when we're structuring our trips and our journeys, it's about that. I agree, getting them to buy in, but it's also the people that they're out there with and gaining that peer support from. That's my angle. Thanks.
No, that's all good. No, that's great.
Thank you. I think John's got a question, and I don't know if John realizes, but Michelle's got part 2 of John's question. So if we have John's question first, and then Michelle can drop in when she thinks it appropriate, please.
Tag team, as always, as I say. Yeah, Rhys, just a kind of a personal thing, really. I think we all sort of do kind of approach these things in different ways. I was just wondering if you personally had a process that you follow, or is it more of a gut feel approach to assessing, the mental health of the individual or the group you're working with at that particular day or week or whatever it happens to be? Something along those lines, I guess. Top tips, I suppose. Without putting you on the spot.
No. It's an interesting one, because I'm just trying to think back on different situations, really, and just trying to think about how I got to different conclusions and where things kind of stemmed from and how things kind of got there. Because without the question being posed, you don't necessarily internally think about how you got to different places. So I'm speaking at the moment whilst I'm thinking about my answer. A little bit of
trying to make your life difficult, you know. There we go.
No, I love it.
No, sorry.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, you know, it's kind of those sort of, you know, I think myself, you know, it's very much a gut feel kind of thing. You sort of try and get a handle on what people are like, what their moods are, that kind of thing. You know, very often, you know, I'm, you know, with groups that I'm meeting for the first time, I haven't met them before, you know, freelancing and that kind of stuff. And you kind of, there you are, get on with it kind of stuff. You know, I think, would I benefit from a bit more of a process-based approach to that? Possibly I would, but I'm just maybe thinking, is there something out there that I could look at, something I'm missing, you know?
I think for me, with a lot of things, I don't generally have a big process approach with things, just because of how complex things can be and how difficult things can be to observe, and different signs and symptoms that people may be having within different situations. So if we use anxiety as an example, people may become more talkative within certain examples, or they may clam up completely and not want to share anything. So what I'm generally doing when I'm out with people is just like, I am a fairly observant individual. I do like to take in a lot of information and try and think about what's going on with an individual. So looking at body position, looking at how stiff or relaxed someone is when they're approaching a certain situation. Are they relaxed and easy going into it? Do they have a bit of a smile on their face? Are they looking fairly tense? What are their eyes looking like? Are they looking like they're really focused on something? Or are they looking like they're enjoying what's going on within their surroundings and what's happening? So by observing different things and seeing how someone has changed possibly, leading up to a crux, a situation, something going on, I can start to think, well, is this happening this way? Is that happening the other way? And how are things kind of tying in with one another? So that's a lot of it. So I don't really have an exact process or an exact gut feeling. It's just through that observation side of it and trying to think about if things are changing as the situation's changed. So as I've gone from a flat calm bit and we can start to hear a bit of a rapid rumble coming on, has one individual changed in comparison to how they were earlier? Have they started to ask me more questions about what's happening with the rapid? Have they perhaps slowed down in their canoe quite a bit and stopped paddling because they're focused on what's coming up in the future? Have they drifted further back in the group opposed to always being at the front of the group? Have they drifted next to someone else's canoe and started to engage with different conversations? It's trying to see those changes that are kind of going on, which could lead me to think that perhaps this person wants to find out more information about a situation and just trying to then engage with that conversation, really. So not sure if that answers things too much or...
No, but believe it or not, it is kind of along what I'm thinking, really, you know. So although you say there isn't a process, there is a kind of a, you know, body language kind of thing going on, you know, an auditory kind of process that you're going through there, you know, and a few things. I think, you know, I try and do similar things. It's just, I suppose it's learning off of other people, you know, so I'm a bit of a sponge with that sort of stuff. So if I can sort of think, yes, then, you know, I find that personally useful, but there we are. That's just me, I think, really. I think I'm going to hand over to Michelle now, I think, stop talking.
Just jumping quickly, I think, John, when we do our profiling of our paddlers, when we're starting a trip, we're not just looking at that technical profile, and we're also looking at the psychological profile and I think a lot of that comes from non-verbal communication. As Rhys is saying, it's how that person said, you know, when they made that cross, was there a smile on their face, or did the smile on the face appear when they got onto the other side when they were safe? And it's all those little bits of a triggers for us that start building up that picture of the individual. Michelle.
And sorry, just jumping on that for a second, just thinking about again, how strokes are flowing together is a big one for me as well. So if people are fairly relaxed, their stroke patterns very smooth, very fluid. It all kind of gels together. Whereas as we get more tense, we kind of jab at the water. Things kind of slice slightly. Things don't really gel as well. Our feel disappears. If we're looking at paddling fundamentals, those bits and pieces coming in, if we're looking at level 1, level 2 stuff, or coach award and instructor awards they are now, I think. So thinking about that feel process. So as we're more relaxed with things, our stroke pattern is very fluid. Everything kind of comes together. Thinking of different canoe strokes, it gels. It all kind of sits in that fluid motion all coming together. Whereas as we perhaps are overly focused on certain areas, that's when people will jab at the water. That's when there'll be those big splashes. That's when the paddle will slip as it's entering the water, go a little bit too deep, or it'll just tickle the surface. All those different things with their paddle strokes, because they're focused on something else rather than the task at hand. And that's typically a big thing for me with mental health stuff when we're looking at stress and anxiety, is people are focused on something else other than the task at hand, which is why things start to fall apart slightly with their performance.
Michelle, do you want to jump in and ask your question? I think then Simon's got a question, has he?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So just following on from all that really, and what John sort of started saying, was do you do anything specifically before expeditions? So do you try and gauge what your group or your individuals may be like?
Not too much, because I find that a lot of the time when people are meeting people for the first time, you can be more anxious, you can be more stressed within that meet and greet kind of situation. So the first time I'm meeting a group, they may be more anxious in those first 5 minutes than they will be for the rest of the time, especially if it's an expedition where I'm assessing them. They're going to think, who is my assessor? What do I need to say? How do I need to impress? What needs to happen with this? So they may behave differently within those first few minutes. So for me, a lot of the time with that initial process, it's just trying to set people at ease. If I'm out for a day, out for a longer period, trying to set things up so that people know they can speak to me, or they can ask different things as we're going along. So if things do build up, then they can just speak to me whenever.
So you don't do anything sort of actually like pre-meeting them on the day of the first expedition. So for example, like we did our guide modules, and one of the things we sort of came up with was the fact that possibly, especially now with all this Zoom and Microsoft Teams, etc., is that potentially we would maybe do a pre-meet and greet via Zoom or something like that, or maybe do a meet up on a day a month before expedition or something, if people could make it, just to try and get a bit of a better gauge of what the guys might be like. So yeah, I was just wondering if you sort of did anything like that at all.
Yeah, if I was looking at so for longer duration expeditions, that's when it's definitely more important. So within shorter trips, I find that we can do things in that shorter kind of time period altogether. But if we're doing things over a longer duration, then having something via this as an initial meet and greet, just to get to know faces. Because emails, you can send out information. It's a one-way process. It doesn't work out that nicely. Phone calls, you can hear a bit of a voice. But if you can start to associate a name with a face, you can start to get to know people slightly. And that builds on that relatedness side of it before we've started off. We can get to know our groups slightly, which can alleviate concerns about who we might be with. We can start to have some base level conversations, build things up that way. And if I was going on a longer expedition, then having a day trip with people would be great, to get to know how they like to paddle, what they like to do, and what style of paddling do they enjoy, what style of leadership do they enjoy. Do they prefer more alpine style of things, or are they very much like, what style of rapid paddling do they enjoy? If I can start to get these ideas before we're going away for 4 or 5 days, what food do they enjoy? How are we going to be cooking things? And just having these base level conversations. Music choices. If we're traveling somewhere to go somewhere and we've got heavy hardcore music playing the whole way, and everyone else is into R&B or something, it's gonna not set things up as well for that initial journey. So yeah, base level conversations, just to get to know our groups as much as we can do which will alleviate a lot of concerns as far as those group gelling processes. And it allows that different side of that relatedness coming in. So the more we can get to know each other, that kind of stems from one side of that relatedness, tying in our motivation and being able to take things forwards then.
Thank you.
For me, Rhys, what you've done there is you've just described the difference between a leader and a guide, where the guide is actually making the trip for the individuals rather than coming on my trip. Simon.
Yeah, hi, Rhys. At some point where we're operating away from people, is there something which crosses your mind where we want to unpack or potentially not unpack the mental health implications that are occurring within the individuals? Obviously, I'm considering that if we unpack and we unpack more than we expect, are we in a position where we can deal with the outcome from that?
So what I'm assuming you're going into is that if we were getting, and people were perhaps going through other perhaps traumatic experiences in their life and go outlining that sort of it, is that where you're coming from? Sorry, just so I can understand.
It could be potentially something which is going on in their life, or it could just be something's not going well for them on the trip. But either way, potentially we're not equipped to deal with what we might find if we start digging around within that mental health sort of side. Does that make a little bit more sense?
Yeah. So for me, as far as the mental health side of stuff, like a lot of stuff with first aid for mental health is looking at a supportive conversation. So it's active listening, it's taking in information, and we can start then to look at some basic bits and pieces as far as like, how we can improve certain things within a certain situation. So we're not going down any kind of route of any form of diagnosing. We're not going down any form of route of any kind of medication kind of aspects or any of that kind of stuff. We're not doing any of those bits. We're having a conversation with someone, trying to understand what it is that perhaps is not working out for them. And if it is within a given situation, then trying to find appropriate measures that we can put in place to alleviate those concerns. So if it is a rapid, for instance, then I'd be focusing on the positive line, where we need to be going. A lot of the time when we speak about position of most usefulness, I place myself where I want people to be. I don't necessarily place myself where the dangerous object is, because most of the time people go towards that dangerous object and end up on top of it with me, and I'm telling them to go away from me. They're coming paddling closer to me to find out what I'm saying, and by which time they're too close. So placing myself away from the dangerous bit, getting them to come towards me, they're avoiding those bad bits altogether. So if I'm speaking to someone above a crux, above a rapid, and they're telling me about things which aren't working out, that they're feeling anxious about the rapid, okay, what is it that you're feeling anxious about? What is it that's troubling you about this situation? Our worst case scenario is we can assist them for portaging around it, or we can paddle a boat down. It's just make sure that they are aware that there are many options, and I'll carry my boat down. I'll give you a hand with carrying this down. I can paddle that down for you. Our aim is to go from point A to point B. Our aim is to enjoy the journey. Our aim is maybe to take in the wildlife as we're going along. So missing out on one very small part because it's making us uncomfortable isn't a negative as far as that expedition process. Is trying to alleviate that concern that they're not missing out on something, that they're not jeopardizing the group, that the group isn't going to look negatively on them because they're missing out on something. It's highlighting that a lot of the time when I'm meeting people, I speak about challenge by choice. So we all have options with what we want to be doing. If we do reach something, so if I am doing a larger stretch of river, I'm going to tell people there will be rapids. And when we reach these rapids, we'll have options for walking around them, for lining down them, or paddling down them, pending what's going on. I've been paddling with people who've told me that they were more anxious about rapids. They haven't done any rapids in ages and not quite sure about it. So at the start of the day, I've said, well, there's some small rapids coming up. When we get to the big rapid, it's going to be out of remit for what you're looking at doing today. So we're going to be lining down it. We're going to just avoid that altogether. Just because I know, because I paddled with them for 2-3 days before that the rapid, they're not going to be comfortable with it at all. So if I alleviate their thought process by saying the rapid's kind of not going to be happening today, the rest of the trip, they were mega happy with everything they were doing. They said it's the first time they've actually enjoyed paddling on a river because they didn't have to think about the rapid. It wasn't part of their thought process. So it's perhaps limiting their options, but for them, they've gone on to paddle more rivers, to enjoy their paddling more because they had a really positive day. It avoided the one rapid, but everything else they did throughout the day was massively positive and they really enjoyed it. So I missed the one thing which could have caused anxiety, stressed it to them, the fact that it wasn't needed to happen. It wasn't needed to happen. It wasn't going to impact their day at all. It's just one very small part. So I think when we are unpacking things, as you said, and having those conversations, it's just important to remember the level of conversation we're going into. All we're doing is supporting people by finding out what is kind of going wrong, being an ear to listen to. And a lot of time by people just telling you what's going on, that's half of it. When they're able to voice something, we start to feel better when we get things off of our chest, when we can put things into perspective as far as where things actually line up. I'm a bad one or a good one, whatever our perspective is, for lists, and going from big picture lists and bringing things down to very small levels. So they're very small attainable tasks. And if we do a similar thing when we're presented with an issue, what is the issue? The issue is, okay, what is it about that that's actually the issue? Is it the fact of swimming? Okay, what is it about swimming that's the issue? I just don't want to get in the water. If you don't get in the water, you don't have to swim. We can just get around it nice and easily. So it's going through the process and finding appropriate solutions that they may be happy with.
I think Steve, it surprised me actually because he's put it quite well. He said that if you can't put the lid back on, then don't take it off in the first place. Which I think if you're on a multi-day expedition, it's a good piece of advice. Okay, so we've got no more questions. So thank you very much, Rhys, for tonight. Great paddle chat again. Thank you.
This was a With Dave production.